it's Miss Lisa from the St. Paris Public Library. Today's nonfiction anytime story is called The Culture of the Mongols. Chapter 1. Warriors of Asian Steppes. The area called the Mongolian Plateau has been inhabited for thousands of years. It is located in Central Asia. The area is also called the Mongolian Steppe. The steppe is a large, flat area of land with few trees and lots of grass. The Mongolian steppe is surrounded by the Altai Mountains in the west, the Gobi Desert in the south, the Siberian in the north. These natural barriers kept out invaders, but they also restricted the number of people who migrated to the area. The people who lived there all shared the same language and way of life. Most people lived there practiced nomadic lifestyle. This means that they didn't have permanent homes and were constantly moving around in the country. They lived in clans, which were made up of different families. These clans would travel around the country hunting and tending livestock. These clans were part of a larger group called tribes. Members of these tribes were all related to a common ancestor. These tribes often fought against each other for a variety of reasons. In the early 1100s, a group of Mongol tribes came together to form the Khamang Mongol Confederation. Its first leader, Kubla Khan, fought successfully against the invasions of the Jin dynasty of China. The alliance was quite powerful until the end of the 12th century, when the confederation began to weaken. Mongolia is the original homeland of both Turks and Mongols. The history for these two groups is closely related, and their languages are similar. Chapter 2. Chapter 2. Genghis Khan. The Khamang Mongol Confederation rule was limited to the Mongolian Plateau area. It took the military genius of a powerful Mongol leader to unite the Khamang Mongol and other clans and to bring about the sudden expansion of the Mongols from their homeland in the 13th century. He was born with the name of Temujin, but became known to all as Genghis Khan. During the early 13th century, Northeast Asia was divided into several tribes and confederations, including Naimans, Mirkits, Tatars, Khamang Mongols, and Kirids. Each tribe was powerful in their own right and often unfriendly towards each other, raiding and looting their neighbors. The one warrior to unite them all one day, Temujin, was born around 1162. He was a descendant of Kubla Khan through his father's family. Kubla Khan was his great-grandfather. Secrets of Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan never let anyone paint his portrait while he was alive. As a result, no one really knows what he truly looked like. Later paintings and drawings are just guesses. Descriptions of him while he was alive claim that he had cat-like eyes, long hair, and a long beard. Genghis Khan's grandson, Kubla Khan, had a portrait of Genghis Khan painted almost 50 years after his death. It is the only portrait of the leader that still exists today. Kubla Khan asked some of Genghis Khan's warriors to make sure the portrait was accurate. When Temujin was only 9, his father was killed by a rival Tatar tribe. Young Temujin declared himself the chief of the clan, but the clan refused to be led by such a young child. Temujin and his family were banished and struggled to survive for the next several years. Young Temujin was even a slave for a time, but he escaped. Shortly afterward, he met up with his brothers and other members of his clan and formed a fighting band. This band would soon grow to an army of 20,000 men. His mother, Hulan, had taught him the importance of forming alliances between tribes while he was growing up. With his army, Temujin set out to form one alliance with all tribes, with him as their leader. Genghis Khan's army was made up of skilled archers and horse riders. They were fierce warriors. Genghis Khan used military strength and diplomacy to unite the different tribes. Tomb of Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan died in 1227 and divided his conquered lands among his sons and grandsons. He had one unusual request after his death. He didn't want anyone to know where he was buried. According to tradition, tribal leaders were buried without markings of any kind. As a result, many legends about his tomb have sprung up. One claims that the procession bringing his body back to Mongolia killed anyone they met to keep their path secret. After the tomb was built, it's believed the slaves who constructed it were killed by soldiers, who then killed themselves. One location where he may have been buried is the Khentai province, near where he was born. Wherever it is, it's claimed that various efforts were made to hide it, like diverting a river over the site. Others say trees were planted on top of it, or many horses were ridden over it. Today, the location of the tomb is still unknown. Exactly how Genghis Khan died is also a mystery. One of his first orders of business was to avenge his father's death by destroying the Tatar army. Next, Temujin's Mongols defeated the Tachai-ut. Merkids were also defeated and forced under Temujin's rule. By 1206, Temujin had defeated the powerful Naiman tribe, which gave him control of central and eastern Mongolia. Seeing his victories, the other tribes took peace when it was offered. This was considered a better option than having to fight such a merciless opponent. Temujin was named the Genghis Khan, or universal leader of the Mongols. Now the leader of a vast fighting force, Khan quickly began conquering new territory. By the time he died in 1227, he had started forming what would one day become one of the largest empires history would ever know. Chapter 3. The Mongol Empire. Today, the Mongol army is mostly remembered for its brutality. If a city did not surrender to the Mongols, it would be destroyed and most of its people killed. However, if it did surrender, it was treated with a surprising level of tolerance. People living in the empire were allowed to continue practicing their own religions. As a result, the empire came to have Christians, Buddhists, Muslims, and more. It also improved infrastructure, building roads and other projects. The famous Silk Road, a network of trading routes throughout Asia and into Europe, came under sole construction of the Mongol Empire. An early kind of postal service was even set up using these roads. The invisible Mongol army. There were many reasons the Mongol army was one of the best in history. Genghis Khan reorganized his army to break down the traditional clan-based divisions that had previously caused conflict among Mongols. He introduced a system of meritocracy. This system meant that the people were promoted to better positions based on their skills rather than their family power. This was very different from the system that was in place before. Genghis Khan came to power. Genghis Khan's army relied on a breed of horse called Mongol horses. They were excellent war horses because of their incredible endurance. All Mongol riders used stirrups, which made riding and fighting on horses much easier. Under the old system, leaders inherited their position through family and clan connections, although they often did not have the necessary leadership skills. Under the new meritocratic system, people who had proven themselves worthy of leadership were put in charge. There were different ways to prove one was worthy, such as showing bravery during battle. The army itself was arranged based on a decimal system. This meant that all units were based on multiples of 10. These included the smallest, the Araban, which had 10 members. The members of an Araban were expected to be loyal to one another and to their commanders, regardless of their clan or ethnic origin. Next came the Zun, which was made up of 10 Arab bands, or 100 men. Then came the Mayagan, made up of 10 Zuns, or 1,000 men. Lastly was the Tumen, which was made up of 10 Mayagans, or 10,000 men. Mongol troops wore armor made of layers of boiled and hardened leather. Steel plates were added to protect their chest, legs, and arms. When the Mongol warriors encountered walled cities, they quickly learned to besiege them. Most Mongol troops were light cavalry, using bows and arrows to attack from a distance. The rest were heavier hitters and used lances for closer combat. Mongol soldiers were expert horsemen. They were trained to serve together as a cavalry force or individually as scouts. Each man usually had at least 2 horses, and some had as many as 4. This allowed them to change horses often so they could quickly cover huge distances. Mongol forces were very good at using psychological warfare to help them win battles. Towns were generally given a chance to surrender. If they did, they were mostly allowed to continue as before, but paid tribute to the Mongol Empire. If they didn't, the town was destroyed and almost everyone in it killed. The few survivors were then sent out to tell the story of their town's destruction. The Mongols hoped that other towns would surrender out of terror once they heard of the army's ferocity. Conquering all. After uniting the tribes of his homeland, Genghis Khan soon set his sights on the rest of Asia. In 1210, he conquered western Xin, located in what is today known as northwestern China. He then declared war on the Jin dynasty, at the time the ruling power of northern China. The Mongols took the Jin capital, Yanjing, called Beijing today, in 1215, though the Jin dynasty would hold on until 1234. Perhaps his most impressive campaign was against the Muslim Khwarezm Empire that ruled parts of Persia and Afghanistan. Genghis Khan reached out to the Khwarezm peacefully at first, but by sending a caravan of traders to negotiate trade agreements. When he learned that the diplomatic party was arrested by one of the Khwarezm governors, Genghis Khan sent 3 diplomats to the ruler of Khwarezm. By 1240, Mongol troops had conquered most of Russia. Then the armies continued on to invade Poland and Hungary in 1241. Empire Shah Muhammad had with demands that the governor be sent to him for punishment. The Shah refused and sent back the severed head of one of the diplomats instead. This would prove to be a fatal mistake. Filled with rage by the repeated insults, Genghis Khan attacked the empire. The war lasted less than 2 years. In the years of 1219 to 1221, the Khwarezm Empire was completely destroyed. Although Genghis Khan died in 1227, his empire's dreams of conquest would not. His descendants continued to spread Mongol rule after his death. In Europe, Russia saw many Mongol invasions, with both Moscow and Kiev falling between 1238 and 1240. Modern Iraq, Iran, Syria, and other parts of the Western Asia were also conquered by the Mongols. They won the siege of Baghdad in 1258 and looted the city that had been the seat of Islamic power in the world for 5 centuries. Japan managed to avoid being taken, but Korea and much of southern Asia were not so lucky. Genghis's grandson, Kubla Khan, even became the ruler of China and the first emperor of the Yun dynasty. Pax Mongolia. The more territory the Mongol Empire acquired, the more stable life became for the people living in it. This was because for the first time ever, Many different areas were under the control of a single empire and its laws. This new order has become known as Pax Mongolia. The huge Mongol Empire stretched from China and southern parts of Asia all the way to Eastern Europe, joining the Eastern and Western world together. One of the main ways this was accomplished was by making trade routes, such as the Silk Road, safer. Merchants could then bring goods from one end of the empire to the other. This allowed them to share not just products and information, but also their cultures. This period of peace brought many things to new parts of the world. For instance, paper and printing processes from China spread all the way to Europe. Gunpowder was another popular Chinese export at this time. Bills of exchange also began to become popular. These were a kind of paper money, similar to what we use today. They freed merchants from having to carry heavy metal coins for an entire journey and made trading easier. Another important innovation introduced was the yam, an early kind of postal service. Relay stations were built about 30 miles apart. It took about a day for a messenger on a horseback to ride from one station to the next, where they got fresh horses for the next stage. This allowed communication between the East and the West to expand. During the Pax Mongolic, trade routes became safe for travel. Trade grew as caravans of traders from many countries traveled across the empire to sell their goods. Mongol laws and rules. Genghis Khan created a code of law called Yasa. The Yasa included laws for soldiers, officers, and doctors, as well as others. The laws focused on three things: obedience to Genghis Khan, ensuring connections between the nomad clans, and punishment of those who disobeyed. It acted as the law of the land in the Mongol Empire. Much of it was created to reduce fighting between clans and tribes and to protect trade. For example, blood feuds were outlawed, and so was theft. Yasa also guaranteed religious freedom throughout the empire, ordering that equal respect and treatment be given to all religions. The penalty for breaking the law would be severe. The most common punishment was death by beheading. Chapter 4: Mongol Way of Life. Genghis Khan gave his family members and loyal soldiers large pieces of land as rewards for their service. Every time the Mongol army conquered another region, members of the royal family, nobles, warriors, as well as deserving servants, each received their share of the goods seized. Even though the Mongol Empire was made up of various ethnic and religious groups and tribes, Genghis Khan insisted that all loyalty was focused only on him. He did not tolerate division between clans and expected obedience from everyone. Life in the Mongol Empire was based on obeying laws and discipline. The empire was considered to be very safe and well run. The theft and destruction of property were strictly forbidden. Genghis Khan valued freedom of religion, and virtually every religion was represented in the Mongol Empire. Religious leaders did not have to pay tax during this rule. His son built a number of places of worship in the capital city for Buddhist, Muslim, Christian, and Taoist believers. The empire was ruled by a system called Kurultai. The system involved a council of chiefs and leaders who got together to discuss and make decisions about the issues of the day. Families voted on an issue by showing up for an event. If a family did not show up, it was considered a vote against the issue. Armed patrols of Mongol warriors traveled the empire to enforce the Yasa law. They punished offenders if necessary. Over time, Mongol rulers adopted some of the local customs of the regions they defeated. Only rulers of steppe heartlands lived the traditional Mongol lifestyle. A good example was Kubla Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, who founded the Yun dynasty after the Mongol armies conquered China. He knew that ethnic Mongols in his empire were few in number and could not successfully rule the Chinese majority in a Mongol way. Instead, he used Chinese political and cultural ideas and relied on his Chinese advisors. Over time, he became a traditional type of Chinese emperor. He focused his attention on China and mostly ignored his Mongol homeland. However, he maintained Mongol tradition within the walled Forbidden City. Kubla Khan was the fifth great Khan of the Mongol Empire. He was the founder of the Yun dynasty in China. The Forbidden City. The Forbidden City is a walled city in modern-day Beijing. It is one of the most famous locations in China, and it is where many Chinese emperors ruled from. However, it was originally built to keep the Chinese culture out. Originally constructed by Kubla Khan, it was meant to be a Mongol sanctuary where the Khan and other Mongols could keep their culture and way of life alive. The city was filled with yurts and traditional tents of the Mongols. These were where the Khan's wives gave birth as well as where Mongol children were educated. Though Kublai and later Khans ruled as Chinese emperors in the Forbidden City, they were still Mongols. Nomads of the steppes. The Mongol people were traditionally nomads. This meant that they didn't have permanent homes, but moved to different areas based on the season and other factors. Even during Genghis Khan's rule, many Mongols lived as herders. However, they were always prepared to go to war when called to arms. Mongol herders were constantly on the move to new pastures where their animals could graze. The most common kinds of livestock were horses, cows, goats, sheep, and camels. Most animals were milked to make food such as cheese and yogurt. Their meat also served as food, and their hides were turned into clothing and shelter. The Mongols and their animals were well adapted to severe weather conditions on the steppes, as well as occasional shortages of food and water. Family structure of ordinary Mongols. The traditional Mongol family was patriarchal. The father was the head of the family in Mongol society. Marriage was important, with sons having wives brought to them and daughters being sent to other families as wives. In this way, alliances between clans were made. Once a son was old enough to be married, he was given a part of his family's herd as well as a portion of their grazing lands. The older the son, the larger his herd and section of land. Parents were well provided for in their old age. The youngest son was expected to stay with his aging parents in their tents as their caretakers. He would then inherit the tent once they died, along with the rest of their herd. Boys very early learned 3 important skills: horse riding, hunting, and herding. These skills allowed them to provide for their families. They also came in handy once they entered the military at the age of 15. Girls, on the other hand, were in charge of the home. They took care of domestic chores such as milking, livestock, sewing, and cooking. Taking care of their families was their main goal. They usually also knew how to herd and loaded up their family yurt when it came time to move. Although men held the power in Mongolian society, women had more influence than in many other societies. Men often asked their wives for guidance in important matters. Genghis Khan's wife, Borta, was his trusted advisor. Timeless yurts. Yurts are still in use today by people in Mongolia and China. Of course, modern ones used more modern materials, but much of the design is the same. Yurts are the ideal home for nomads. They could easily load the wooden frame and felt covering onto camels or cattle and move them to new locations. Portable dwellings. Mongols lived in gurs, which literally meant home. They are also known by their Turkish name, yurts. They were round, portable structures. The frames were collapsible and they could be quickly broken down for moving, usually within an hour. It took about the same amount of time to put them back up. They had pointed roofs so that the rain and snow would run off of them. The point of the roof could be opened to let out smoke or closed to keep out rain or snow. The fire pit in the center was used to heat the home. They tended to be warm in the winter and cool in the summer, which made them ideal dwelling for all seasons. Herding and hunting. Animals played a central role in the lives of Mongolian herders. The most important animal was the horse. Smaller than most, the Mongolian horses were known for being able to travel long distances without getting tired. Important in both family and military life, horses were beloved. Mistreating a horse was even considered a crime, and those who did so could be punished severely. Sheep and goats were extremely useful animals. They provided milk, wool, and meat, all of which were important to survival on the steppes. Sheep wool was used to make the felt that covered yurts, providing important shelter. Wool was also used to make rugs that covered the dirt floors of their homes, as well as clothing. Cattle and camels were generally used to carry heavy loads, but they also provided milk. Camels were especially valuable for their unique wool. Mongols depended on sheep and goats for food and wool. They had large flocks to provide the wool needed to make their clothing and the thick felt needed to cover their yurts. Mongols tamed and trained eagles to help them hunt. The golden eagle was the most important bird of prey. Legend says the Genghis Khan himself hunted with trained eagles. Mongols didn't rely just on livestock for meat. They were also skilled hunters. Common prey included rabbit, deer, and wild boar. They were even known to eat large rodents such as squirrels and marmots. For Mongols, food fell into one of two categories, white foods and brown foods. During the summer, they tended to eat mostly white foods. These were usually dairy-based and made from the milk of their livestock. Cheese, yogurt, and erig, fermented milk from a female horse, were common staples of the Mongol diet. Brown foods were mostly meat. These were what Mongols ate during the winter. A common dish was boiled meat with a side of wild garlic. Eating utensils weren't widely used, so everything was basically finger food. Chapter 5. Downfall and Legacy. Before he died, Genghis Khan divided his empire among his sons and grandsons. He gave his son Ogadai control of most of Eastern Asia, including China. Ogadai became the second great Khan of the Mongol Empire. He gave his second son, Chagatai, control over Central Asia and northern Iran. His youngest son, Tulur, received a small territory near the Mongol homeland. Finally, he gave his grandson, Batu, control over what is now modern Russia. The Mongol Empire included a massive area of land. As a result, later empires in the region all have their roots in the Mongol Empire. The Mongol Empire of India emerged from Genghis Khan's son Chagatai, Chagatai's rule over Central Asia. One of his grandsons, Hulagu Khan, founded the Ilkhanate, which became the heart of Persia. Another grandson, Kublai Khan, unified China. From then on, even though China experienced a number of different dynasties, the country remained unified. Kubla Khan not only ruled China as their emperor, he also ruled the entire Mongol Empire as Grand Khan. However, his successors weren't so lucky. They eventually became seen as too Chinese, and the other Khanites refused to recognize their authority. A giant structure of Genghis Khan stands guard near Mongolia's modern-day capital of Ulaanbaatar. It was built in 2008. The Jung dynasty, that Kubla established was overthrown by the Ming dynasty in 1368. The Yun leaders fled back to Mongolia and established the Northern Yun dynasty, which lasted until the 17th century. Gradually, the other Khanites further west also lost power. Unlike other empires, there wasn't one big event that led to the fall. There was no great battle or last stand that clearly ended the reign of the Mongols. Instead, the various Khanites became more and more isolated, and gradually their power faded. The last Khanate, the Khanate of Khiva, lasted in Russia until 1920. The end of the Mongol Empire was also the end of a period of great stability throughout Asia. The Silk Road and other trade routes were no longer as safe as they had been. Trade and communication were disrupted at first and eventually taken over by the Muslim Ottoman Empire. Nadam is the largest festival in modern Mongolia. The participants compete in wrestling, horse racing, and archery. The festival celebrates the traditional Mongolian warrior heritage. At its height, the Mongol Empire was the largest land-bound empire in history. Some claim the death toll from Mongol War was as high as 40 million people. Despite the brutality and his army was known for, Genghis Khan was known to rule his people fairly. The uniting of the eastern and western worlds under Mongol law allowed for the trade of information that greatly broadened the horizons of people on both sides. Modern Mongolia is all that is left from the once mighty Mongol Empire. Mongolians are fully aware of the unique history of their country. Today, Genghis Khan is viewed as a hero, and many Mongolians look back on the accomplishments of the empire proudly. Mongols. The culture of the Mongols.